In less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed illusion of Queen Camilla's absolute control over the royal narrative was quietly and ruthlessly dismantled behind the heavy oak doors of St. James's Palace. It did not happen with an explosive public confrontation or a chaotic leak to the tabloid press, but with a frozen digital server and a quietly revoked administrative access code that left her communications team completely powerless. What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that while a title is merely a constitutional courtesy, true institutional influence is forged in bloodline public loyalty and silent technical control. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the high-stakes digital power grab she recently attempted, how a striking red dress worn by the Princess of Wales inadvertently exposed the scheme, the freezing institutional retaliation engineered by Prince William and Camilla's devastating realization that despite sitting on the highest throne in the land, she commands no true loyalty from the palace apparatus. To understand why this specific internal clash reached a boiling point, we must step back and recognize the staggering 30-year manipulation that brought Camilla to this pinnacle of British social hierarchy. For 3 decades, she played the longest, most meticulous game of reputational rehabilitation in modern history. She survived the bitter public fallout of the 1990s, systematically worked to soften the memory of her role in Princess Diana's tragedy, and slowly replaced the old institutional guards with her own staunch loyalists. When she was officially crowned Queen, dropping the restrictive consort caveat entirely, she believed she had finally won the absolute right to dictate the visual identity of the modern monarchy. She operated under the fundamental belief that because she held the unwavering devotion of King Charles, she held the keys to the entire institution. She felt entirely untouchable, assuming that the palace bureaucracy would always bend to her personal public relations agenda. But the fatal flaw in Camilla's architecture of power is that it is built entirely on the fragile authority of a temporary reign, completely separate from the enduring bloodline of the future king. That dangerous illusion of absolute power became a battlefield. Just days ago, during a major state event at St. James's Palace celebrating the 125th anniversary of Cancer Research UK. To the outside world, this was a routine gathering of sovereign benevolence, a highly visible platform for the King and Queen to project stability and unity. Behind the scenes, however, Camilla's office chose this exact moment to execute an act of silent institutional erasure. Paralyzed by a growing fear that her public relevance was fading compared to the younger generation of royals, Camilla's team issued a strict binding administrative directive to the Royal Communications Department. What appears to be true, according to internal palace leaks, is that her office mandated a total digital prioritization for the King and Queen, explicitly ordering that all official social media feeds, media syndicates, and press releases from the event focus exclusively on Camilla's sovereign presence, while minimizing any competing royal imagery. It was a calculated attempt to monopolize the global spotlight and cement her position as the supreme matriarch of the firm. But Camilla severely underestimated the undeniable magnetic pull of the future queen. When the Princess of Wales arrived at the gala, she did not engage in any overt displays of dominance. Instead, Catherine stepped out in a striking, symbolic red heartprint road art dress, a visual masterstroke that immediately captured the imagination of the global press. It was a display of freezing aristocratic restraint that required no explanations. Within minutes, the international media landscape was completely saturated with images of Catherine. The global public did not look at the sovereign titles, they looked at the future. This sudden shift in attention triggered intense paranoia within Camilla's private office. Fearing that her heavily curated moment of absolute triumph was being systematically overshadowed, Camilla's aristocratic facade cracked. She allegedly unleashed a wave of sharp reprimands aimed at the press officers, demanding a manual intervention to suppress the imagery of the Princess of Wales on official platforms and asserting her supreme authority over the royal narrative. That is where the story changes, and where the devastating contrast of Schadenfreude truly crystallizes. Camilla, holding the highest title in the land, was visibly losing her composure over a digital news cycle. Prince William, armed with the forensic knowledge of how palace bureaucracy actually operates, did not respond with emotion or a public defense of his wife. He used the system to execute a silent, tarantula-like counterstrike. William's administrative team, which quietly monitors the central servers and digital output of the joint royal households, quickly intercepted the rogue directives coming out of Camilla's office. The future king recognized that this was not a simple scheduling conflict, but a direct, parasitic encroachment upon his wife's rightful place within the institution. The instrument chosen for this silent retaliation was a total administrative lockout. Without a single word spoken in anger, William's office initiated a strict technical protocol update regarding the management of joint royal digital assets. Overnight, the administrative access logs for Camilla's senior press staff were quietly restricted. When her team attempted to force through updates to the official royal feeds to bury Catherine's global triumph, they hit an invisible, impenetrable wall. Their digital credentials had been neutralized. Palace IT and communications officials operating under direct binding orders from the heir apparent's estate politely but firmly ignored the frantic demands of the Queen's office, citing updated security guidelines that required joint approval for all high-tier media syndications. The visual and psychological humiliation for Camilla was absolute. She had spent decades clawing her way to the top of the hierarchy, believing that the crown would grant her the power to control what the world sees. Yet, in front of the very household staff she sought to command, she was exposed as entirely powerless against the quiet weight of the true bloodline. She realized in a wave of cold panic that her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently exposed her vulnerability. Stripped of her illusion of supreme control and effectively blocked by her stepson, Camilla knew the trap had snapped shut. Terrified by the sudden collapse of her authority over the royal apparatus, Camilla retreated to the one remaining card she had left to play. She went directly to King Charles, presenting the evidence of her frozen access logs and demanding that he use his supreme sovereign power to crush William's administrative blockade. She demanded that the Princess of Wales be officially reprimanded for overshadowing the crown, and that her own authority as queen be aggressively enforced across all departments. The entire future of the internal royal hierarchy hung in the heavy, suffocating silence of the room as the queen stood waiting for the king to deliver her salvation. When Camilla stood in the quiet sanctuary of the king's study expecting the full, undeniable weight of the sovereign to crush William's technical blockade, she encountered something far more terrifying than anger. She encountered a devastating silence. For 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate protector. He had fought his mother, his advisors, the British public, and his own children to force Camilla's acceptance into the royal fold. He had spent decades burning through his own political capital to shield her from the consequences of their history. Camilla fully expected that in this moment of acute humiliation, Charles would summon the Prince of Wales and deliver a crushing reprimand. She expected the king to remind his heir that Camilla was the queen, and that her word was absolute law within the private walls of the monarchy. But he sat in the suffocating quiet of his office and did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for power, and it ended not with a grand declaration, but with a freezing realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the king. And as the monarch facing his own profound vulnerabilities and the fragile state of his reign, his primary duty is the survival of the crown. Charles knows with forensic clarity that William and Catherine are the absolute bedrock of the modern monarchy. They hold the public's affection, they generate the positive global press, and they represent the unbroken legitimate bloodline. To attack William over a digital news cycle or a press protocol would be an act of institutional suicide. Charles chose the survival of the institution over the fragility of his wife's ego. In that singular moment of silence, Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life, that the king will no longer save her from the Prince and Princess of Wales. To understand why this administrative lockout is so permanently catastrophic for Camilla, we must examine the staggering commercial desperation hiding behind her royal title. The public sees a queen riding in gilded carriages, draped in historic diamonds and waving from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. But behind closed doors, the forensic financial architecture of the firm tells a remarkably different story. Camilla owns virtually nothing of the royal estate. The Duchy of Cornwall, the billion-dollar real estate empire that funds the monarchy's private endeavours and operational costs, belongs entirely and legally to Prince William. The grand estates of Sandringham and Balmoral are tied directly to the sovereign. Camilla possesses no independent constitutional funding, no vast ancestral properties of her own to fall back on, and no blood claim to the staggering wealth she has enjoyed over the last 2 decades. That detail matters immensely because it exposes the ultimate leverage in this silent war. Prince William is not just the heir to the throne, he is the landlord. He owns the vast agricultural lands, the commercial properties, and the financial portfolios that generate the family's private millions. Even King Charles's beloved private residence Highgrove House, the very estate where he and Camilla cultivated their decades-long affair, is legally owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. The king literally has to pay rent to Prince William to live in his own favourite home. Camilla has no independent generational wealth that can compete with this staggeringly immense corporate structure. If Charles were to pass away tomorrow, Camilla would immediately become a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the new king, completely at the mercy of William's administrative goodwill. She would not own the roof over her head the cars she has driven in, or the payroll of the staff she commands. This financial and structural reality is why Catherine's quiet defiance and William's technical lockout was so devastatingly effective. Catherine did not need to scream because she knows that she and William hold all the actual capital. The palace staff obeyed the technical restrictions because they recognize where the actual, enduring power of the institution lies. You do not align yourself with a temporary queen when the future king controls your pension. This was the silent, ruthless retaliation William and Catherine have perfected. They do not leak angry statements to the press. They do not give tell-all interviews complaining about their feelings. They simply use the massive, quiet weight of the institution to crush any attempt at institutional erasure. What viewers and royal analysts have noticed in the days following this internal crisis is a profound, subtle shift in the new order of the palace. The digital protocols remain exactly where William placed them, serving as a permanent visual boundary that Camilla is no longer permitted to cross. But the consequences extend far beyond a single social media feed. There has been a noticeable change in the way protocol is being quietly weaponized to limit Camilla's reach. Reports suggest that access to certain private quarters and scheduling privileges, once freely dictated by Camilla's team, are now being double-checked and routed through William and Catherine's administrative offices. This is how the royal family wages war. It is not fought with shouting matches in the drawing room, it is fought with locked doors, revoked security clearances, and schedule conflicts that gently but firmly push the target toward the exit. This brings us to the deeper tragic meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured intense public hatred, she orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and she successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could secure her family's future and erase the spectre of the past once and for all. But what this story encoding the closed gates of St. James's Palace proves is that the crown on Camilla's head is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable power. Yet she is paralyzed by the commercial reality that she is merely a temporary tenant in William's empire. The ultimate tragedy for Camilla is that she played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing everything for the ultimate title, only to realize too late that the Prince and Princess of Wales own the board. Catherine did not just wear a red dress, she restored the natural order of the monarchy. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of the bloodline, and forensic restraint will always outmaneuver unchecked ambition. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her. Walled off from the royal future and forced to live under the absolute unyielding authority of the next generation. The era of the Shadow Queen attempting to rewrite the monarchy is effectively over. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.